Take yourself back 10 years. Uptown Funk just came out, Barack Obama is still president, and Musically is still a popular app. Imagine you're having a conversation with someone and they use the word woke. It's hard to remember, but back then, the word didn't really have any negative connotations. It wasn't cringy, and it certainly isn't polarized in the way it is today. Now flash forward to 2024. Woke has become the battle cry of the entire Republican Party. Check out any speech from Trump, DeSantis, Vivek, or any conservative commentators, and you are guaranteed to hear any opposition groups branded as woke.
We're ending woke immediately. I ended woke.
How woke is bad, how the woke mob wants to take your freedoms, how the woke politicians want to trans your kids. Woke has very quickly gone from a passive slang term meaning to be aware of social inequalities to the arch evil behind every left-wing idea. So how do we get here? This is a graph of how much the term woke has been used over time. The word was first used in a socio-political context in 2008, when R&B artist Erykah Badu used it in her song Master Teacher. In the early 2010s, the word began circulating on Twitter in discussions surrounding systemic racism and police brutality. The term was often used in the phrase, "stay woke," a term activists would use to encourage each other to be aware of the injustices around them, or in their country. It was generally seen in a positive light. Being woke was a good thing. It meant you were an individual who cared about becoming educated and learning. By 2015, woke had become a unifying concept that united those who cared about issues of equality, and had become a clearly political term that was fully mainstream. As with all things that become mainstream, a contrarian reaction formed to oppose woke and the ideas it represented. Woke opposition was pioneered by Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Charlie Kirk, and Candace Owens, in conjunction with the rise of the Trump campaign. Trump was the first major politician to also publicly oppose rising woke culture. This anti-woke messaging may have been branded as a new opposition, but that's all it was, a rebranding of old ideas. The anti-woke attacks of the 60s manifested as civil rights opposition. In the 70s and 80s, it was opposition to women's equality. In the 90s and 2000s, it was opposition to gay marriage. The new anti-woke attacks were directed at several different rising movements in the late 2010s. The LGBT equality movement, Black Lives Matter, and cancel culture were the primary targets. During this time, woke was generally targeted at progressives and progressive ideas. Over the next few years, the specificity of the word has decreased, and the generalized application has increased. Woke has become a catch-all term for any left-of-center idea, institution, or person. The word has become totally detached from any specific meaning, and now applies mostly to political and cultural opponents of the right. If you really look into the usage of the word by right-wingers, it's just a proxy for saying, this thing is bad. There are two main issues with the way the word is being used today. The first is that woke, as it's used now, is thought-terminating. The ideas that woke represents to a typical right-wing person who opposes the woke movement may not have any sort of ideology that underlie them, but they do have one fundamental thing in common. Racial equality, women's rights, gay and trans people being allowed to be themselves. These things all represent a change to the way that mostly older, mostly white, mostly straight people are used to living their lives. So when confronted with this change, instead of diving into these new concepts, trying to understand them, even if you don't end up agreeing with these changes, by stamping any perceived change with the term woke, and thereby demonizing it, conservatives can just move on, without having to spend any critical thinking on engaging with the idea. I want to stress, it's not thought-terminating to use woke because they disagree with woke ideas. If a conservative hears about the existence of non-binary people, for instance, and does some reading, talks to some people, tries to understand what the idea is, and reaches a conclusion on how they will respond, that is a good process, and a healthy one. Because if, even at the end, the conservative holds the same views they did at the beginning, they've been forced to defend them, and forced to learn. Secondly, a lot of woke ideas that conservatives oppose so vehemently aren't as evil as they're made out to be. I think a lot of the confusion around these ideas comes from how complex they are. For example, take DEI, which has been a common woke boogeyman in recent years. This outrage reached a fever pitch in September of 2020 when President Trump signed an executive order banning federal funding for any training programs that promote DEI. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. To be clear, it isn't just about race. It simply has a goal of making things fair. It's not even one standardized way of accomplishing this goal. The only thing that unites all DEI programs is that they strive to make things equitable. When you think about this, it's pretty gross that that alone is enough for conservatives to oppose it. Of course, there are examples of DEI implementation that can be criticized. It's not above improvement. But everyone agrees with DEI to some extent. A really good example of DEI conservatives probably agree with is one I first heard on an episode of Jubilee made by this guy named Parker. He said that the Senate is DEI for rural and smaller states. This is absolutely true. The Senate is one of two branches of Congress, with 2 senators elected for each state, regardless of population size. This means that smaller, more rural, less populated states have disproportionately more representation in the Senate. I'm fine with this. There are good arguments for why the Senate should be composed like this. But why are you alright with Senate DEI? Don't you hate DEI? Well, not really. You only hate it when it involves race, when it comes to how an employer may hire an employee. Another major target of the anti-woke mob is critical race theory. Trump similarly signed an executive order restricting federal involvement with CRT, and it's commonly cited as a terrible, destructive force in countless Trump, DeSantis, and Vivek speeches. It's also one of the most misreported and misunderstood topics in political discourse. Critical race theory, for one, is only taught at the college level. Seriously, it's taught in first-year law classes, not elementary and high schools. But then again, when people say CRT is bad, they aren't saying that class is bad. They are saying learning about any history involving the injustices of America's past is bad. CRT is an academic framework that arose in the 1970s, specifically to examine how systemic racism manifests in American legal systems. It's not merely the mention of the fact that systemic racism exists in America, or policies that aim to ameliorate racial inequalities between black and white people. It's also not stupid college kids on campuses saying that white people should feel guilty because of the color of their skin. CRT was applied retroactively to all of these things because it's obvious to most people that complex legal theories about inequality shouldn't be taught to elementary school kids. But that's not what's happening. There would be no benefit in this. What is beneficial is teaching people of all ages that there is a history in America full of consequential events that has led to current inequalities that have to be remedied. Of course, there are important discussions that need to be had about how we do this and where we apply these teachings. And that's a perfectly fine thing to debate about. But the wholesale rejection of any attempt to even acknowledge that there is a history of racial discrimination that has present-day consequences is ahistorical, anti-American, and fundamentally anti-progress. I also want it to be clear that the goal of righting these historical wrongs doesn't have to do with putting down white people. Any approach that tries to oppress white people would be a bad one. That repeats these mistakes. So CRT shouldn't be thought of as an anti-white program, but a pro-development process. As we can see in these two examples, there is a process by which the right takes fundamentally good ideas and attempts to destroy not only the ideas themselves, but the conversation surrounding them. Most Americans don't really have a perspective on the specifics of DEI or on the legal scholarship of CRT. The right has taken these highly academic terms and broadened them to massive movements of progress, and then by demonizing the worst of the academic term, united half the country against the movement of progress. This is what has happened with woke. It's not that all woke ideas are good. It's that there isn't really such a thing as a woke idea. There are good values that underpin lots of what the right ascribes to woke society. But even to defend this is giving too much ground. Yes, we should challenge systemic racism. Yes, we should integrate LGBT people into society in a more welcoming fashion. But this isn't because these things are woke. It's because they are good for societal development, and for America, and for the people they affect. No activist who supports, for example, changing policing policies to be more understanding of black communities, does so because it's woke. But the Trump supporter who opposes that policy does so in opposition to wokeness. In this sense, woke kind of does have a meaning, even if it's only a functional one. But this meaning is so divergent from the original intention of the word that its very part of speech has changed. Woke no longer has a use as an adjective. It's actually a noun now. Woke is the set of ideas that represent change. Woke is overarching and broad and vague, not because it's meaningless, but because it has a very real meaning to so many. To the right, woke is singular. It is personified. It is the venomous monster that we have to be on high alert for at all times, constantly guarding the gate. For if it is let into America, our society will die. But the bland, banal truth is that this thing is not in fact a monster. It is us. Not a force outside of American citizens. It's a fundamental American value. And yes, it can be misguided, it can be confused, but it is part of us.